You're watching Behind the Headlines. I'm Pacchia. My guest today is one of the most knowledgeable sources on the state of law firm economics. Dan DiPietro is chairman of the law firm group at Citi Private Bank, and he's here to walk us through his year-end report about the financial health of big law firms, which came out earlier this week. Welcome back. Thanks for coming on the show.
It's good to be here, Lee.
So on the surface, at least, this report was pleasantly surprising after a downbeat Q3 report from Citibank. At the 179 firms that you spoke to, profits were up 4.3% in 2012, and revenue actually grew at 3.6% last year. What drove the better-than-expected results?
Yeah, I think let's first acknowledge that it was a good year, and it's probably consistent with the definition of what a good year means in the legal industry in the post-recession, Great Recession environment. We do have some concerns, though, about the what drove the results.
Right. So it's not all candy and roses.
Right. Right. First, let's talk about demand, because demand picked up discernibly in the fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. Now, this is purely anecdotal, but what we are hearing is that a fair amount of that was driven by tax-related concerns. With the election results, with the likelihood that tax rates would go up, obviously subsequently was the case. A lot of transactions actually originated in the fourth quarter, closed in the fourth quarter, and law firms got paid in the fourth quarter. Now, we don't suspect that impacted all law firms, but we think it probably moved the needle a bit on the revenue number.
Is that spike in demand something you expect to see continue into 2013, or is that going to fall back?
Yeah, I guess our view is that demand in 13 will likely exceed 12. Frankly, part of the reason for that is it grew by 0.2% in 12, so it would be hard to do worse than that. So we do think demand will be a bit stronger in 13. However, the fourth quarter anomaly doesn't necessarily suggest the trajectory will be as severe as we saw in the fourth quarter.
And we also saw better bottom line numbers because of quicker collections and a slower expense growth rate.
Yeah, we just did some work subsequent to the report that you looked at. We looked at two things. The fourth quarter is typically the best quarter in collections for law firms. They're cash basis. There's a big push at year end that most U.S. law firms undertake, and it results in a disproportionate amount of revenue coming in the fourth quarter.
So we're going to see a lower revenue amount for Q1 of 2013?
Typically, that is typically the case, and we think it will be a little more so in 13. The reason being, the normal delta, if you looked at the 7 years prior, the 7-year average prior to the fourth quarter of last year, and then you compared that to the fourth quarter of 12, the percentage of collections increased by about 1.5%. So that translated directly to that 3.6 revenue number that you quoted earlier. So definitely a reason why the results came out as they did was a big collection push at year end.
So, I mean, we have a bunch of caveats here to go along with some pretty good bottom line numbers in revenue and profits for firms in 2012.
Right.
But a little bit of a mirage?
Well, it's probably too strong a term, but I think caveats is appropriate. One other factor worth noting is something that the economists call survivorship bias. I think, as everybody knows, as I'm sure all of your viewers will know, there was a significant bankruptcy last year in the industry. And that, so as a result, that firm disappears from the base year, 2011, in terms of the data, but their partners, much of their revenue, much of the demand that they would have generated went to other firms. So while the 3.6% result in revenue growth is real in terms of it's the actual number, you have to put into context the fact that some of that, at least, probably somewhere between 0.75% to 1% was driven by the so-called survivorship bias.
So the bottom line numbers, in some measure, partially because you had to recalculate the 2011 numbers because Dewey was no longer there, was affected by this large bankruptcy case that we had. When you were on last, you spoke to us about a list of law firms that you had who might be approaching the point where they're in some financial turmoil. Won't ask for names, but is that list growing or shrinking at this point?
I think that list is actually shrinking, and it's a result of positive performance in the year. So as a result, we've kind of taken that list down a bit in terms of its. It was not a particularly sizable group, but it's gotten a bit smaller, which is good news.
Any idea as to how much?
I don't know, to be honest. I can't recall what, but we were certainly pleased to see that list shrinking and not growing.
You reported that total attorney headcount outpaced demand growth last year, resulting in continued declines in productivity. Right. We're more than 4 years into the Great Recession in law. Why, in your opinion, are firms still not better at controlling their expenses?
Yeah, well, I think there's two distinct points to make here. One is I think firms have been very good at controlling their operating expenses. And that includes non-legal staff. That number has been coming down significantly. And in fact, we track the ratio of non-legal staff to lawyers. And that ratio used to trend 5 years ago in the 1.3, 1.2 range. It's now probably in the 0.8 to 0.9 range. So, and that's during a period when lawyer growth has been slow or negative.
And a lot of law firms are moving their back office operations to very much cheaper locations than they currently are.
Exactly right, and I think that trend will probably continue. On the lawyer side, I think there are several factors that are at play. One is law firm leaders have long memories, and they remember back when we had a significant recession in the late 80s, early 90s, and firms cut income and class size. They cut first-year and second-year associates. They rescinded offers to first years. They got a huge amount of negative publicity around that. And they also, when the economy picked up, mid-level associates were endangered species, in the mid-90s.
And that creates problems.
So that created capacity issues for firms, and they remember that. They remember all of that. The other factor that's worth noting is firms have absolutely reduced their intake of new attorneys. I mean, if you look at the average class size for most large law firms, it's dropped by probably 40 to 50% as compared to, say, 2007. But attrition is also down significantly. And the irony is, if demand picks up, it's good news because excess capacity will probably shrink. But some good attorneys will have other options. Clients will start to hire, et cetera. So if that happens, you'll see attrition levels increase, and firms will be scrambling a bit in the opposite direction. But I want to stress, we're far from having sopped up the excess capacity in the industry. In fact, it went the wrong way, as you mentioned earlier, in 12. And that continues to put a lot of pressure on margins and on pricing.
Dan, you have such great 35,000-foot perspective on what's happening in the profession, certainly in economic terms. We're going to push you for a prediction here. Is 2013 going to be better or worse than 2012 was for BigLaw? I'm
going to split the difference with you, Lee.
Right on.
It's probably going to be a very similar-looking year. We think profits will be up in the low single digits once again. We think revenue could be slightly better than last year because we think demand will strengthen a bit, and that will help in the second half of the year, even though I think revenue will get off to a slow start. Firms will do a good job of controlling expenses, but expenses will be up, but we think revenue growth will probably exceed expenses somewhat.
All right, right on. Dan, thank you for stopping by.
My pleasure.
That's Dan DiPietro from Citi Private Bank. If you'd like to learn more about the issues we just discussed, be sure to go check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. You can see more of our videos on YouTube, and you can follow our updates on Twitter. I'm Pacchia. Thanks for watching.